remote. I'm excited to be joined today by our immigration team in Brazil, Gabriela. Gabriela, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're very welcome, Tim. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, so I know that we were just kind of talking a little bit before this. I was trying to understand a bit myself before we dove into this video. So really excited to help people who are interested in moving to Brazil, which is a huge and massive and beautiful country. So I know that there are some digital nomad movements over in Brazil at the moment, and people kind of interested in relocating over there. So I think it's a great time to kind of dive into what Brazil offers for those remote workers. And with that, I'd like to maybe just start off by elaborating what is the digital nomad visa in Brazil, and kind of just like generally like who can move over on that visa category.
So, Tim, basically any foreigner that intends to work remotely in Brazil, if they meet the requirements, which is basically the documentation requirements, are eligible to come to Brazil on a digital nomad visa, which we call a DNV visa.
Okay. And so speaking on those requirements, obviously remote workers are part of that. Are self-employed individuals also eligible? So like if you own your own company, is that going to be something that you'd still be able to utilize the DNV for?
Yeah, that is a possibility. However, self-employed individual, they'll need to have, their own their own foreign entity, and then they will have to execute an agreement, with that foreign entity to demonstrate that this individual, is self-employed by his company. And then we will need to provide the documentation for that purpose to the Brazilian consulate, overseas or in Brazil, in case he's already in Brazil as a visitor. Additionally, with, the documentation like his passport, health insurance, evidence that he's able to support himself. With that, it is possible for him to travel to Brazil as a self-employed individual.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and that sounds pretty normal to most other digital nomad visas. I mean, you're essentially just having to execute that. It's a steady income and employment. So that's great to hear. And then how long are these visas awarded for the digital nomad visa, and are they extendable?
So that is a very good question, because in Brazil, so you have two pathways. So the first one is to apply for a visa, right, directly at the Brazilian consulate overseas. Or if you are in Brazil as a visitor, you apply for a residency permit, which wouldn't be a visa, it would be directly a residency permit in the country. And the residency permit, it is valid for up to 1 year. And the temporary visa is also valid up to 1 year. But when the person comes under the visa, the visa is basically for 1 year for the person to travel into the country. Because when this person arrives in Brazil, he or she will be required to register at the federal police to obtain a residency card. And the counting date for him to be in Brazil will start as of the date that he arrived in Brazil, or she, I'm sorry, arrived in Brazil with a temporary visa.
Okay. And so it kind of backdates to even when they get it, if they've been in Brazil, they go through that process with the local police, but it backdates to when they first arrived. So it's not
Exactly.
once you get the card, it's when you first arrived.
Yeah. So the visa basically it's
Okay.
valid for 1 year, meaning that you can travel to Brazil within that year, but the residency will only start to count, counted from the date you arrive in Brazil.
Okay. And so just to clarify on that really quickly, because I feel like there's a lot of people who are like, wait a second.
Yeah.
So you get 1 year to relocate into Brazil, but then once you actually move, then you get an additional 12 months from the date that you get into Brazil. So you kind of have like a leeway on when
That
you
is
actually enter.
perfect. That is exactly it.
And then, so out of curiosity, those who obviously, if you apply outside, that's kind of what we just described. So if you apply from your home country, that's how that works. But for those who apply inside Brazil, maybe you can elaborate on kind of that timeline in which you would get an extension. Like, If they're on a tourist
So
visa, is it backdated to when they first entered? Yeah.
So that's also a very good question. Basically, you'll have to submit a process with immigration authorities in Brazil, and they're going to review the process. And only once it is granted and published in the official gazette, that is when the date will start to count. So one thing that I didn't mention, which I think it is important to mention, is that when you have a visa, right, that we mentioned, and you arrive in Brazil, you also have to register at the federal police. The time for registration of the federal police is within 90 days counted from the date you arrived in Brazil. While when the person files the process in Brazil and the authorization is published in the official gazette, then the time to register at the federal police is within 30 days counted from the date of the publication in the official gazette. However, as we mentioned, for the individual that arrived with a visa, the date that starts to count of his residency is the date that he arrived in Brazil with his visa. While with the person that arrived in Brazil and filed for the process in Brazil, the date that the residency starts counts from the date that it was published in the official gazette.
Okay. And so when you say
I hope
published
that's
in the
clear.
official gazette, that's essentially, yeah, exactly. That's essentially when they come in and like process it on their side. So once they've kind of gone through and done that, they've like initiated that process. Is that pretty much when the publishing in the Gazette takes place, or?
So the publishing in the official gazette, it takes place only after the process is approved. So how does it work?
Okay.
Basically, we submit, all the documentation electronically to what we call the Sistema Migrante Web. They review the documentation, so the immigration authorities, they take a thorough look into all the documents that were submitted. And with that, they were going to review and analyze within 30 days. If everything is all right, they'll grant the residency permit. And then within 5 days, they will publish it in the official gazette. And that is the date that the individual can start scheduling an appointment to register and obtain the RNN, which is the identity card.
Cool. Which is essentially your residency permit outside of like the visa application. That's what allows you to stay for that 12-month period, correct?
Exactly.
So yes, very, very kind of complex on the dates there, but good to know that 12 months are allowed. And then from my understanding, as we discussed before, there is an additional 12 months that you can extend. So there's a minimum of 2 years, assuming you remain eligible. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And then you also briefly mentioned on some unique cases, this definitely isn't a guarantee by any sense, but in some unique cases, you've had clients where they've extended even beyond those 2 years on the same visa category, on the same digital nomad visa?
Yeah, although the normative resolution, establishes that the individual can only renew for 1 year, we have seen individuals, that have applied, for an additional extension, and the immigration authorities have approved. So we have seen individuals staying for more than 2 years in the country. But that, it's an exception. That shouldn't be the rule. And it will depend, on the immigration authorities' analysis.
But beyond that, you did explain that there are other visa pathways in which you can, or residency pathways where you can transition that digital nomad visa before the end of the 2 years into a different type of residency to extend your stay as well. Is that also correct?
Yeah, it is always a possibility, because in Brazil you have kind of various options, for you to decide if you prefer to stay and live in the country. For example, let us say that you meet someone in Brazil, and you decide to enter into a stable union relationship. It is possible to, let us say, apply for a residency based on family reunion, for example. Let us say that you do not want to pay rent anymore and you decide that you want to invest in real estate and purchase an apartment for you to live. That's also a possibility. Another option would be, for example, if a Brazilian company decides to hire you, they can always sponsor a residency permit for you based on an employment agreement. So there are many pathways, that you can, once you have like a job offer, or if something happens and you meet someone, as I mentioned, that you can convert into a different residency permit. So it's very open, you know.
Okay.
Even let's say that you
Fantastic.
decide, this person
Yeah,
decides that
yeah.
they want to study in
Wonderful.
Brazil, you can also apply for a student residency permit, for example.
And just to clarify, Gabriella, you can assist with all these as well. So if anyone is curious in any of these various pathways, I don't think I've mentioned it yet, but obviously there's a link in the description of this video. You can book a call to speak with Gabriella.
Yes, please.
Um, so I guess beyond the digital, yeah, beyond the digital nomad visa, there is a pathway to dual citizenship eventually, or am I mistaken there? If
Yeah,
somebody were to stay long enough.
that is a bit more complex because you need to have a residency visa for indefinite term. And on a digital nomad visa, you would
Okay.
not have that because you will only be renewing and it'll be temporary. So for that, you would need to, first of all, speak Portuguese fluently. So that is a requirement for nationality here in Brazil for requesting citizenship, Brazilian citizenship.
Hmm.
And you would have to have had an RNM for indefinite term, valid for 4 years, and you would need to live in the country for 4 years.
Okay.
You cannot leave for more than 90 days within 12 months. So there are specific requirements for citizenship that it is a possibility, but not under a DNM visa.
Exactly, because the digital nomad visa is a temporary residence permit, and you're describing you need to secure a permanent residence, which is indefinite, and then have that for 4 years before even being able to apply.
Exactly. There are some exceptions, right? For example, if you have a Brazilian child, then it reduces for 1 year, but you also have the barrier of
Okay.
language. So you have to take a test, or which is there's specific requirements for that, and or you have to do a university in Brazil, or there are other criterion that I can, of course, if you need, I can provide more further information.
Of course. Yeah, and this is obviously, citizenship isn't a handout. It's something very serious. I don't know very many countries around the world that don't make you take a citizenship test and speak the language first. So, but exciting to know nonetheless that there is a pathway should somebody be interested to stay long term in Brazil. So shifting back to the digital nomad visa, what are kind of the income requirements or savings that you may need to have to be eligible for the digital nomad visa?
So you need to have a monthly income of at least 1,500 US dollars, okay? Or bank savings
Okay.
of at least $18,000, which is a one-time proof.
Okay. So you can have either or. So if you have at least 18,000 in savings, you don't necessarily need that 1,500 a month.
Exactly, that's correct.
Okay, that's exciting. And then obviously we're not. This isn't tax. This is more legal, generalized advice. So if you need specific questions, obviously reach out. But in terms of taxes, perhaps you can just briefly elaborate on what that looks like for somebody on a temporary residence permit, which is the digital nomad visa, year to year on those 2 years there.
So in Brazil, for a person to become a tax resident, they have two options, right? Either they come on a visa and they become a tax resident from day one, or they become a tax resident after they reach the 183 days within a 12-month period. Okay, so basically, these are the options. But for individuals that are coming on a digital nomad visa, they would only become a tax resident after they stay for 183 days. They do not become tax
Mm-hmm.
residents counted from the first day they arrive in Brazil. One important information is that when you become a tax resident in Brazil, it's based on your worldwide income tax. So you need to see where you have income around the world to try to see if these countries have um, tax treaties to avoid double taxation.
Okay, wonderful. And then obviously, yeah, once it comes time to file for taxes, find someone to do those taxes for you, and Citizen Remote outside of that can likely assist with that as well. So. Okay, and then I think the only
Yes.
other thing that we really haven't touched on, well, I guess there's two things. What nationalities are eligible? Maybe you can just touch on that really quickly, or is it pretty much anyone?
So yeah, we don't have any restrictions. So any individual from any nationalities are eligible to apply for a digital nomad visa. We do have some facilities, for those individuals that come from the Mercosur, because we have a Mercosur agreement that allows individuals to obtain a residency. That it's a very simplified process, and that they come and work remotely. So that would be the exception.
Hmm.
But anyone that wants to apply, irrespective of the nationality, it's possible. The only restriction is if you have criminal records, and that is a restriction depending of what type of crime, how can I say, what crime happened,
Yeah. And that was going to be my last question, is background checks and translations. So obviously you just said, I assume that they will need to submit a background check, a criminal background check, to ensure that they have kind of a clean record. If not, then it gets a little bit more complex, as you just said. But then in terms of translations, do they have to
Yes, that is
translate
very
documents?
important. Yeah, I'm sorry, didn't let you complete the question. But yes, background checks are very important in Brazil, and these documents, they must be issued within 90 days. And all of them, they depending on if you, for example, if you apply in Brazil, they need to be apostilled. Depending on the country that you apply overseas, they also need to be apostilled. And if you do apply in Brazil, it has to be legally translated by a sworn translator in the country. But let us say that you apply overseas, depending on the country, you don't need to translate it if it's in English, Spanish, or Portuguese,
Okay.
or French.
Well, wonderful. Okay, so I think that pretty much covers everything. Is there anything off the top of your mind that we maybe didn't cover that we want to just make people aware of generally, or do you think we kind of covered most of the important things?
Yeah, I think we covered most of everything, but I really wanted to draw the attention, for the individuals that are had the time to watch these videos, because it's a very interesting moment, to come and work in Brazil, especially due to the fluctuation of the exchange rate. Because nowadays individuals, because of the dollar and the euro, the currency, it's favorable for individuals that want to travel. It's cheap, in a way to live in the country. So it becomes an
Hmm.
interesting option, to opt for Brazil to work remotely.
Yeah, absolutely. And then like whether it be like obtaining an apartment and stuff like that, obviously it becomes even more affordable for people who have that income coming from abroad. Yeah, so fantastic point.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
and Brazil's, if you don't mind me saying, freaking beautiful from what I know. So it's a huge, vast, wonderful country. So hopefully, people who are interested and hear this
Yes.
and see that they're eligible, please book a call with Gabriela. Again, the link is in the description. Otherwise, you're all on our Brazil on our website. So plenty of ways to find and reach out to you, and we'd love to be able to assist with their visa process. So. Gabriella, thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully this was helpful.
Thank you very much, Tim, once again. And I hope that whoever's interested, please reach out. Thank you very much.